Good morning, Endeavour, and a very happy Friday to you all. I've joined you today for our final chapter of the Explorer for this week, called Fishing in the Dark. And just like the other two, it is quite long, so I'll just keep my eye on the time. It'll probably go to 3 extracts this one, but we'll see. Fishing in the Dark. The Explorer hadn't moved by the time the sun rose. He lay, snoring, where they had left him, a beetle perched on his chin. Max woke up first and kicked Fred in the crotch as he scrambled to his feet. Max scratched himself all over and then went running across the stone square, shook the Explorer's shoulder and sat down on top of him. The Explorer startled awake. Fred flinched, remembering what the man had said about his startle reflex, but he merely looked mildly, politely appalled. "Can I eat this?" Max asked, and he thrust a handful of grass into the Explorer's face. The Explorer shifted Max gently on the floor and sat up and began to blow on the fire. "No, you can't," he said. "You didn't even look." "The chances that the answer is yes are so slim." He looked up. "That's poisonous." "No." "Definitely poisonous, or maybe?" "Definitely." "Oh, and this?" He held up the Explorer's chin beetle, which had fallen on the ground. "You could eat that," said the Explorer, and he gently took the beetle from him, "but the max of 2 hours from now would not thank you. As a rule of thumb, it's best not to eat things that are still moving." "But I'm hungry, and it's only moving a tiny bit." "I would still emphatically discourage it." "What does that mean?" "It means no." "Oh." Max lay down on his back. He didn't cry, but his face looked blank and older than it should have been. Quietly under his breath, he began to sing to himself in Portuguese. Fred scraped some dew from the leaves above him and used it to clean his face. He looked over at Max. Properly looked. For the first time in days. The boy was growing thin and his cheekbones stuck out under his eyes. Lila had worked hard to make him look cared for and clean, but he still had a snail trail of snot across his face and green dust in his eyebrows. The Explorer was also looking down at Max. His face was shaping itself into a peculiar expression. His eyes were bright and his mouth was tight. Abruptly he rose to his feet. His voice was brisk, artificially and unconvincingly brisk. "What are you all sitting about for? Time is precious. Shouldn't you be preparing your journey?" "But how exactly? We don't know what to do," said Con. Her voice was almost a whine. Lila shot her a look. The Explorer's expression was very dry. "If you have a preference of surviving, you'll need to know how to spear a fish. There have been expeditions when the men and I have survived on fish for half a year." Max's face lit up. "Fish? Right now?" "Tonight. There's a small lake not far from here." "But I'm hungry now," said Max. "It needs to be dark. You can spend the day making spears." "I tried that," said Fred, and he slapped away a mosquito, "but the vines I used to tie the flints on kept breaking off." "Vines?" The man looked shocked. "You don't use vines to make a spear. That would be like using packing tape to build a steam train, boy. You use intestines. Where are the guts from your bird?" Con pointed to the jungle where they were buried, the intestines and the other rejected bits at a safe distance. "Dig them up and heat them over the fire and use them as string." And he made a winding gesture, as if tying a knot. "And don't bother me until you've done it." He turned abruptly. They were getting used to it now, and he strode away to the far end of the courtyard towards the tangle of vines and cut off the corner of the square from sight. They undug the intestines. They weren't a pretty sight, and being buried hadn't improved them. Con washed them in half a coconut, and Lila and Fred began laying them out on the stones, trying not to look too hard at the semi-translucent tubes. Max tugged at Lila's ankle. "Lila, did you hear that?" "What?" The air was silent, bar the constant whir of the insects in the trees above them. Then Fred jerked his head round. It was that same roar he had heard before, choking through the air. "It's coming from there, from behind the vines," he said. "I'm going to go and see." "No," said Con. "He said don't bother me. And I happen to think if a person wears claws for cufflinks, you should do what they say." "But what if he's being eaten?" said Fred. "Surely that doesn't count." Lila shook her head. "I agree with Con." Con looked round in surprise. "Really?" Whatever it is, he doesn't want us to know, and we can't afford to make him more angry. Lila turned with unexpected firmness towards the fire. Let's make those spears. Reluctantly, Fred sat down. The morning was a sticky one, and nobody smelt better by the end of it. The intestines weren't easy to empty, and the process of heating them over the fire to harden them felt unexpectedly medieval. "This is not how I pictured fishing," said Con. "I thought it was all old men sitting around on a riverbank telling people to be quiet, like river librarians." Fred opened his mouth to reply, but the guts dripped and spat hot fat at his teeth, so he shut it again. He wondered if his fingers would ever lose the faint scent of dead bird, but by the time the sun began to set, he had a long-handled spear with a flint glinting in the light. Lila's spear was strong and straight, but the wrapping around the flint had gone awry where Backer had tried to get involved in the process and covered himself in grease. Com's spear was the neatest. Her hands were competent and controlled, even when gutting a bird. Fred went in search of water to wash the grease off his arms. Some of the stones had hollows that collected enough rainwater to wash a small patch. He moved from stone to stone across the citadel, gradually shedding the worst of his burnt grease smell. As he came back, he heard voices. The explorer was kneeling on the ground, bent over his pith helmet, and Lila was crouched next to him. "You have to be gentle with his knees and elbow joints," the explorer was speaking, his voice low. "They're still very fragile at his age." Lila nodded. "I know." She reached into the pith helmet. "I can feel it when he moves. They're so light, like seagull bones. Make sure you check under the armpits for parasites. There." Backer's head reared up over the edge of the pith helmet, and he let out a wail of protest. The explorer gave something approaching a smile. He's being unnecessarily dramatic. The water's good for him. Now hold him by the forearms. Like this." Lila lifted Backer from the bath, dripping up, his legs dangling. "Yes, check his stomach for ticks." Lila checked, brushing her fingers over the sloth's belly, her eyes squinting with care. "There's nothing." Backer's fur was plastered against his skull, and his eyes were wide with the affront of it, and he gave a squawk as he hung from Lila's hands. "Now you'll need to dry him." Swiftly Lila unplaited her hair. It fell into an uneven wave to her waist. She lifted the sloth into it and rubbed him gently, Backer snuffling among the deep brown curls. Fred saw Con inside the stone room give the ghost of a smile. Max was half asleep, his head on Con's lap. The explorer raised his eyebrows. The corner of his mouth lifted half an inch. I doubt that particular strategy would be suggested in veterinary college, but good. The sun was dripping over the top of the statues of the panther. The explorer looked up and saw Fred watching. He sprang to his feet as if embarrassed to be caught mid-kindness, his bad leg catching on his good one. Suddenly, he was brisk again.